I would like to start our Northeast Students Welfare Committee. We are thrilled to welcome one and all to this conversation with Aruni Kashyap. The talk or the conversation is titled Life, Literature and Society. This is going to be the first in the series of thought-provoking conversations with individuals from different walks of life, and we have kick-started with our favorite author. And allow me to introduce our principal. Our principal, Dr. Gyandosh Kumar Jha, he is the principal of Atmaram Sanatantham College. And he is also a writer. He has edited many books. He's been a meritorious student, bagging the first and gold medal and winning lots of awards. And so he's not only a great achiever, but he's a very kind soul, and especially to the students. And he encouraged such programs that help students to hone their learning skills, especially for education. Now, I would like to call Sir to come and give us the welcome address.
Thank you, Dr. Achingli Kemai. Good evening to all and good morning to Dr. Aruni Kashyap. On behalf of Atmaram Sanatantham College, I welcome you in this webinar and in this interactive session. So, and I would like to congratulate convener of Northeast Welfare Committee, Dr. Achingli Kemai, and other members, Dr. Sivani Fukan, Dr. MP Singh, for doing such a wonderful work for the betterment of the students and creating better academic environment by organizing these kind of interactions and webinars on such a pertinent topic. So once again, I welcome Dr. Aruni. You have given your valuable time for our students and for all of us, and you are going to deliver your lecture. So I think it would be very interesting topic for all of us who has very keen interest in the literature and language and knowing about the how literature can affect our life and can make our life so beautiful. So thank you. In fact, in our college, Northeast Welfare Committee was established to create uh, uh, some facilities for the Northeast students so that they cannot feel alienated in the society and they should be part of the mainstream of the college activities. That is why we always do this kind of interactions and webinars. And from the beginning of till date, they have organized so many webinars, seminars, conferences, and our cultural festival, Rainbow. So I'm very glad to see your all the activities, and I hope that in future also you will continue with this your programs and your future endeavors. So all the best for the organizers, and once again I welcome you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening and welcome to the talk on life, literature and society with our respected guest speaker, Dr. Aruni Kashyap. I, on behalf of the Northeast Welfare Committee, ARSD College, extend warm regards to all. I'm honored to be given introduce Dr. He is an assistant professor of creative writing at the University of Georgia, Athens. He is a prolific writer and translator from Assam. His noted works have appeared in and Assamese language. He started publishing short poetry since his high school days. His short stories, poems, and essays have appeared in prestigious publications such as the New York Times, The Guardian UK, amongst others. His first essay is Nakoin Etia Duroi. He has also authored books The Bronze, Tengpakri Tehsildar with Indira Gandhi, his father's house with 1,000 stories, how to tell the story of an insurgency, 15 Tales from Assam. His book of poetry collections, how is no good time for bad news, for Marsh Hawks 2018, and also for advice of in 2018. His writing addresses like repression and the violation of humankind. Thank you, sir, for accepting our humble invitation. It means the world so much. Introduce Dr. Achini Kame. She's been the nodal officer of the Northeast Welfare Committee since 2014. She has made it her mission to foster dialogue between the Northeast and the mainland students and have enabled harmonious coexistence with the larger college community. The committee under the leadership of Achini Ma'am work to counsel, mentor, and create opportunities for us students, especially in states. The desire to safeguard the plurality of voices and identity, larger narrative of progress and excellence is upper mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Gidam, for the beautiful introduction. And I would also like to, before I start off with the conversation, I would like to also welcome all the students who have joined from the other colleges and not only from ARSD. And also among us, we have so many other esteemed colleagues, our colleagues from other colleges as well. I see more than 15 of them have joined and many more will join. So thank you so much for taking out your time and joining our program. And I know that this conversation is a unique opportunity for us all to add to our understanding the work of Aruni Kashyap. And through the lens of a creative intellectual, we will be able to learn more and widen our worldview or our horizon. And thank you, Sonmanyo Aruni, for accepting our invitation. For the benefit of our students, I would like to start off by asking you to share with us your experiences when you were here in Delhi as a student. I know that people coming from the Northeast, if they look like the mainlanders and if they are fluent in Hindi, they settle down quickly and they fit in easier than the others who might not look like the mainlanders. And so I would like to, that's just an observation, so we would love to hear from you, your experiences.
Thank you, Professor Kame, for initiating this conversation and asking me questions. I would like to thank everyone who has joined. I have been interacting with somebody called Gunjan Das. I don't know if this person is I don't know the gender of this person, so it was only in the email. But to Gunjan Das also a big thank you for inviting me, and it's been a pleasure interacting with whoever was interacting with me from the email account. So I hope Gunjan Das will make an appearance sometime, and I'll be able to see them face to face. Thank you so much, Dr. Kame, for asking this question. I came to Delhi in 2004 to study literature. And during those days, I remember one of the big challenges was that you had to book your tickets from really months ago, not just for flights, but also for train. And people, obviously, everybody wanted to travel in, if they could afford, Rajdhani Express, because it was the shortest trip, 26 hours or 28 hours long. And unlike there are other kinds of trains, like Abadasam Express, Sampark Kranti Express, and other things, which would take you days to reach. Abadasam, I think, took you like a week, if I'm not exaggerating. I mean, at least 3 days or 4 days. I think it took you. It was that bad. That was the cheapest and the most convenient way. I remember coming with a friend of mine, and it was the first year, I think, there was a centralized form that was used. So you could like apply to multiple universities with the same form. In previous years, the students used to go to every individual university and apply, every individual college and apply. So if you want to apply to 10 colleges, you have to go to 10 colleges. And suppose you didn't clear the cutoff for any of these colleges, then if you didn't apply to more than 10 colleges, you couldn't just get through any college. It was very difficult. I remember that when I came here, and obviously I went to St. Stephen's College, and I lived in the residence halls of St. Stephen's College. So I would say I was very much protected. But one of the experiences I definitely had was living outside the confines of the protected college campus for about a month and a half or 2 months with a friend in a hostel, in a boys' hostel in Gurmandi in North Campus, and it was near Vijayanagar. It was mostly like deserted because not many people were at the point of living there, and we couldn't afford to live in a hotel for such a long time, such a month, because we used to come. I remember students used to come, I think in late May or early June, and continue to live and stay until the admissions were over, and they started the class and went back home in the fall in the autumn break. People who could afford, they went back, but we just couldn't afford to make 2 trips. We were not that rich. So we stayed back, and we booked a hotel, not sure whether we'll get a college hostel or not. It was there, I think, for the first time I got to know that I'm from the Northeast. It is something that, I had not grown up with. I had grown up as an Indian. I had grown up as an Assamese. I'm within Assam. I had grown up as a lower Assam or upper Assam. These divides were there, or identities were there, but I never thought of myself as a Northeastern. Of course, in Assamese newspapers and Assamese literature, in non-fiction and fiction, I would regularly read about Uttar Purbanchal, which is Northeast. But it was not like a identity, and it was not an identity that came with a lot of baggage. So I think I became a Northeastern the moment I sort of stepped into Delhi. But but for a long time, the moment I stepped into Guwahati, I stepped out of the Panbajar railway station. I became an Indian and an Assamese again. But every time I came back, to the so-called mainland, I became a Northeastern, and along with it came certain kind of expectations, baggages, biases, prejudices. I remember women friends of mine, they faced a lot of trouble looking for a PG during that time. And because the people usually had very unflattering opinions about women from Northeast, and they didn't want to rent it to Northeastern women. And also, they made judgments on the basis of appearances, on what we wore. It was very strange for me because I have been to the south. I've traveled to, even to Orissa before with my parents. This is something that it was completely different, and I had no idea about. Obviously, to these places with my parents, I had traveled both as a tourist or because of some medical reasons, because my mother was not well for a while. We had to take her to Vellore. But this was completely unheard of me. So I would say that I became an Northeastern, but after, I don't know, since 2004 to 2021, it's been almost 2 decades. I have come to accept the idea of being a Northeastern very proudly, very happily, because there are so many solidarity networks that exist under this umbrella. That is the one reason that we have a shared sense of history, shared sense of marginalization from the Indian nation, and shared sense of culture, of being indigenous, of having a experience that is different, from most other parts of India. All of these shared, but very, very polyphonic and heterogeneous within us, but there is also something shared. And this is something that is, I think, I find very inspiring and enriching. And also as a writer, when I started publishing poems and when I started reading and poetry gatherings. I was called an artist and writer, and immediately at that point of time, it was a very solitary place. If there was a conference, you would meet Mamang and Temsula, and those are the only people who would come from all the way from there, and I would join them. Sometimes Neetu Das would join, and Neetu Das had not published a book. I had just started writing. Neetu Das was a very popular blogger. Her name was, she had a blog called Rivers Blue Elephants, where she wrote poetry and published poetry. So it was a solitary space. It was a small space, and we were very happy to sort of have each other and have each other's backs in whenever there was a conference in Delhi. So as I said, I like the term now. I know it is not the best term. It is an umbrella term. We are all very, very different, but there is, because of some shared sense of experience, this umbrella term has created a sense of solidarity among all the Northeastern states. And I love this solidarity, and I think this solidarity is supremely empowering.
Thank you. That was some 14, 15, 17 years ago, but now the situation is still the same. It's really, really tough and difficult for students coming from the Northeast. Just a few days ago, a few girls, they were out walking, and then some people asked them, what are your rates? That's the latest racist attack on them. And so you talk about also that this little pocket of oasis or solitary pockets where you could stay and you were encouraged and you were inspired by some. And so for the student community, if you could just share a little bit of the, let's say, the strategies you followed when you were a student here in Delhi to keep you, let's say, disciplined, or to keep you on track to do what you came here for. A little bit of suggestions or advice to the student, and also let them know some of the strategies you had gone through.
Yeah, I went to a college where everybody was so intelligent, and I after the first week, I think each one of us felt extremely depressed, and we thought that we don't belong here. And then we started talking to each other, and I found that the whole class thinks that they don't belong here, except a few, because everybody was so intelligent. So that was one big thing that would keep me on the toes. I was also very poorly read in English literature, world literature. I had grown up in a household that celebrated Bangla literature, that celebrated Assamese literature. I read writers from India a lot, in translation and in original. I grew up reading Hindi thrillers of Surendra Mohan Pathak, because these books are available in the local library or in my house. But I was not very well read, so a lot of the time was spent in diving into books, which was always my passion. So it was now this diving into books also became a sense of intellectual exercise, which I think ruined quite a bit of that, ruined my pleasure of reading. But I wanted to catch up. I didn't read, I hadn't read the latest book by Naipaul, who was the, big name at that point of time in so-called Indian literature of Indian English literature, and so it was a lot of time spent in reading and also figuring out, the life here. I was also very protected because I lived in a hostel. That I would say that, and it depends. The hostel, it has so many activities that we barely got out of the campus, and there are so many societies. There are always, there are, I think, about 25 to 30 different clubs and societies in the little college. So we always were very, very busy inside the college, keeping ourselves occupied. There were film screenings. There were, people auditioning for plays. There were people busy providing different kinds of social. There was a social service which was Hydra-headed. It has all kinds of activities. So all of this kept me very busy. But whenever I came to meet my friends from Assam or Meghalaya outside the campus who lived in Vijayanagar and Indravihar and all those places, I remembered how hard their life was. And even my friends who did not live in the college residence, but attended the same college, their lives were also very hard, with regular problems with landlords, racism. It was, and I could like yeah. I mean, I saw racism for the first hand like that actually. So the tips would be, there was no mobile phone and the internet, which was a blessing. Every morning when I work right now is I actually like switch off my Wi-Fi so that I don't get distracted. So today I remember that I should keep it on because I'm going to be connected. But there was one big thing, that was there was no mobile phone. You told a friend, I'm going to be in a library, and they would find you in a library if they really needed to. But right now, five different people can call you in five different directions. And for some reason, we would keep our phone on or at least in a vibrating mode. So I think that was a big boon not to have the internet, not to have the distraction, and that really sort of kept me productive, reading, attentive, and so on. Our attention spans have been completely gone because of that. Another thing was that I also had a large network of people who were also from the different small cities of Assam, who came through Cotton College because my mother was a professor there. So a lot of these people who went to Cotton College, they are also my mother's students. So I found a solidarity network among them as well, and it was really fun to go to the Horaswati Puja or the little Bihu function that they would organize in their own localities. But primarily at that point, I'm not at all surprised that the racist attitude have not changed. I think this is going to become more and more because more and more students are coming out and people are also speaking up. At that point of time, if something happened, we didn't speak up because we were so small in number. To organize a protest, there was no WhatsApp group. We needed weeks of planning, weeks and weeks of planning, even to organize a march or a protest. And even then, 20 or 15 people would turn up, because it was so hard to spread message. Social media was not a big thing. But still people were, constantly sort of getting their voices heard. But I'm saying that it has become so much more easier to get our voices heard. I think we have to always think about these problems at a structural level. Whenever you see any coverage, of Northeast related issues, you will see that there are people who are big experts on Northeast. There will be a person from Maharashtra who will be an expert on Nagaland. There will be a person from Tamil Nadu or Karnataka who will be an expert on Manipur and so on. But why aren't you asking the person in Arunachal to write about Arunachal who would have so much more in-depth knowledge, or somebody who people of Arunachal would like to be their voice, So that is one thing we have to. I think we regularly participate in silencing local indigenous voices, and that has to change. Only then I think these kind of problems will decrease because if indigenous voices are constantly silenced and erased and marginalized repeatedly like this, it actually boils down to real violence on the street like this. Because it trickles down and it trickles down in a very dangerous fashion. So we must think about it structurally, intellectually, what we can do. So I feel that literature is a great way of combating those stereotypes. We must read each other's books. We must support each other's books, poetry, make people read. I remember whenever I meet somebody from somewhere who is interested in Assam, I say, here's a lovely book that you should read. And that is usually like Indira Goswami book or an Arun Sharma book or any other writer whose work is translated. And I think that, we have to do it at that level as well as at the education level. And something like your organization is doing is to sort of regularly hold talks and awareness campaigns in conversation sessions like this. And I think these are the different ways we have to think about these issues. But I was not necessarily a very ideal student, so I don't know if I can give really a lot of tips. I spent a lot of my time in a library. I did not care about my exams too much. I spent a lot of time writing because I always loved writing. I wrote from a very young age. So I wouldn't recommend that because it doesn't lead to good exam results.
Thank you so much for all the wonderful tips and suggestions, and I'm sure the students must be writing down, taking notes, and keeping comparing what they are doing now and what they need to do in the future. And Gidam has introduced that you had started writing at a very young age, in fact, in school, and as a bilingual and also a translator, writing in Assamese, writing in English, and also translating Assamese into English, and maybe English to Assamese also. So here, what intrigues me is that can every bilingual become a translator? Obviously, every bilingual cannot. Beyond the daily translations that we do for our daily lives to survive, translations we do for ourselves, and so every translator, they know that they are aware of the complex nature of language, of words, the structure, and the difference in the culture of the source text to the target text, and so in order to find meanings and contextualize it or transfer the cultural context, like, we would like to learn a little bit from you regarding that.
Thank you. Those are many questions about translation, and I hope I will get it all together. First, I think that I think having knowledge about two languages is not enough for translation. I think one has to have a literary sensibility, and it is both talent, but also comes largely from reading for a very long time. So if somebody has been reading from a young age, knows how language works, how surprising and beautiful it can be, and knows two languages, and knows both the languages very, very well, then they can become good translators. When I see good translation, I know that this person knows what works best in each language, and that's why they're able to do that. In fact, translation is almost transcreating in some ways, because sometimes you cannot find the exact equivalent, but you have to find the closest equivalent and yet make it sound like as if it is effortless. I think Indians are very good translators, or at least functional translators in general. We are reading constantly in different languages. I go to a certain part of Guwahati and speak in Hindi. I go to a certain part of Delhi and bargain in my broken, terrible Bengali, and so on. When we meet friends from different regions, our languages switch. So we are very, very good translators in that sense, I think. But when it comes to literary translation, I think reading widely and having a literary sensibility is very, very important. I always think I do not translate from English to Assamese, but I do translate as a sense of responsibility from Assamese to English. I wish I did not have to do that. When good people like Shivani Baidu and all start translating, I hope to sit down. And I think that more people should translate, and so that the writers can write their fiction peacefully. But I do it as a sense of both as a duty and as a sense of belonging to a tradition that has enriched me. I'm an Assamese writer. I wrote for 7 years before I published my first novel in English, which was an act of accident. I had written several novels in Assamese. My short stories would be accepted, but no publisher was interested in publishing my Assamese manuscript. So I thought, let me write it in English. And I wrote it in English, and then it didn't work out. I wrote it again in English, and other novels didn't work out. So maybe it was the third or fourth novel. I have all those manuscripts of different stories that eventually got accepted, by a publisher, and that's how it was an act of accident that I wrote in English, my first book. But I have always written in Assamese. I was featured as an Assamese writer for the longest time in new writers issues, in this and that. I was writing since I was an undergraduate. I wrote also a little bit in high school, but in very local magazines. Actually don't even have those short stories anymore, but I did start writing from a young age. You are right. Some tips on translation. I think we have to think about when we think about translation, most of the time people are always obsessed with how loyal the translation is, and they use all these misogynist things to say like, translation is like a wife, always going to be loyal to you and blah blah. So I find it really like sort of offensive, and I think it's reductive also. I think translation is a beautiful act of solidarity and love that you extend to the author. So some of the things that I follow while translating is, if obviously if I love the text or not. That's one that's paramount to my translation. The other thing is that the author has to have a very good working relationship with me. I talk to the author and I say, I'm going to give you these changes. First page, here are the changes, here are the edits, here is my translation. If you are ready to do it, I'll do the rest of the pages. If the author gets back to me with the changes and is eager to do those changes, is eager to take my edits, I translate the work. And this is, you'll be surprised. Some of the most well-established writers are ready to do this, but sometimes youngest writers are not ready to do this because they think that it's an intrusion into your own writing. But I think that I feel that it is editing, because in Assamese literature, there is no editing that happens. You send something, if the editors feel that it is ready for publication, they will send it to the typesetter and it'll come back to the proofreader and the copy editor. No copy editor, actually mostly proofreader, and it will be published. That's how it is done. Nobody sits down and works with the author to develop a project. But when I translate something, if the author is comfortable, I ask them that I want you to develop this scene because this scene is very crucial and this scene is not required. So could you please take it out so that I can have a better English version? Most of the time people agree, because one of the reasons people agree is because I have known these people for ages. They are my friends and colleagues as Assamese writers. They don't see me as an English writer. They see me as an Assamese writer who have grown with them, debuted with them, or they, like, if I translate Anuradha Khanna Pujari, for example, who is an established writer in Assam, she trusts my judgment. She was the first one to publish me in Assam, in Assamese, in Khadin actually. So she trusts my judgment. She says, "Tumi jodi extra line lagai dibo khuda lagai diba," which means that if you want to add an extra line, just put it there. I will see and approve it before you send it to the publishers. Which means that if it needs extra explanation about something or an extra line, or I like to add like move one line from the earliest part of the text and move it later. If I wanted to do any of that, she is fine with it as long as I keep a track of it. So things like that, So I think that it's very important for me to have a very, very, very good working relationship with the translator. Another translator story I just recently translated, I just felt that in the English language, simple present tense would work best. In Assamese language, we tend to switch tenses a lot. And I said that you have to let me translate this entire story in one tense and not in past tense the way you have done it in the Assamese version, but simple present tense, because the portions that are in simple present tense work better, and there's an immediacy and urgency to it. And then the translator agreed, the author agreed with me because I showed them a sample. So that's how I think I work like this with the author. So a living author is very important, and so that I can have a good working relationship. Also, I always think about what is best for the target language. I do not think of this as I do not think of the active translation as cultural information. I think of the active translation as working between two languages. The questions are always artistic for me and cultural for me. And I find this obsession with what is lost in translation extremely funny, because something will be lost in translation. That is why it is called a translation. And people have entire conferences and seminars on that, and I don't know why.
It must be such a blessing, or it must be great to understand different languages, because it allows you to see not only from two pairs of eyes, but from two pairs of ears as well, from different perspectives. And so, and what you have put in about the lost in translation bit also, it's quite informative, and also the changes in the tenses as well. And if I may ask you something that's really a little bit personal, or it might be a close guarded thing, not a secret, but on looking back or on rereading your translated works, looking back on hindsight from this point, do you feel that you could have better your translation work, or you could have done something which might be the outcome might be better? And so if you could tell your younger writing self from now, what would it be?
I would tell my younger writing self um, to wait longer to publish. Purely for the quality of the work. I think that if I had waited longer, I would be able to produce better quality fiction and better quality translation. But as I said, I really do translation as a sense of duty to my language, and I think it's a I think it is very important for writers from the subcontinent to engage with more than one language, and I think it's a very important part and process of the decolonizing process. And it's very crucial to be able to do that. And I think it's a power, and I think I want to use this power as much as possible. That is why I translate. But as I said, if I see more and more translators are translating, I will stop translating. Mostly, I'm translating in a state of anger and rage that why is this story not more widely available, or because an author had requested me when I translated the Bronze Sword of Hankhakri Tehsildar based on a Bolo woman. And it was Dr. Goswami who requested me to translate it because she thought that I would do a good job. And I said, I don't know how to translate. I've never translated the whole book. She said, like, I think you'll be fine. And somehow she had that instinct. And I'm very grateful she sort of picked me. I was just a freshly graduated college student. And I translated the book. Sometimes I had hounded the author, to allow me to translate because I love the text so much. It's all different kinds of organic situations. It's not this one. But I think it'd be preposterous of me to say that I don't regret. I don't see flaws and unevenness, creases on my work. I think I've not done my best work so far, and I think I have so many projects in my head, in my mind, and I'm eager to do that. And so yes, I think I occasionally go back to my own work, and I do wish I could edit it. If somebody wants to publish it, suddenly an old translation, I quickly polish it a little bit more, But I think as I have more control and flexibility with both languages, I think the translation also gets better and better.
Thank you so much. I guess that's a very sane advice especially for the young ones, to hold on to it a little bit more before you get it published. But then, as writers coming from the region that we call Northeast, we have a sense of urgency as well to get published, the stories, different perspectives, different stories that needed to be out there. And so I guess there's some urgency in that as well. And holding on to it for 3 years, 4 years, that also might be just my thought on it, but it might also be counterproductive to some degree. But thank you so much for that. And so
I agree with you. I totally agree with you that I think when we are from a misunderstood, racialized, underrepresented region, it's very important to tell our stories. I always say if I could, I would have written my first novel a thriller probably because I love reading thrillers, but it was because the stories of the extrajudicial killings during the insurgency, alleged extrajudicial killings during the insurgency, were so widespread when I was a high school student, and it stayed with me forever. The terror, the insecurity, the horror in the villages, and my grandmother's village. It was such a dark phase. Every day somebody was getting shot in their house. Every day, entire families were shot there. It was in the late 90s, the secret killings of Assam. And I think I couldn't have not written that book at that age. I think when I was in Delhi, I had the confidence that I could write a novel, and that is when I automatically was drawn to it. Um, I don't think I had the luxury to write a thriller, or I don't think I had the luxury to wait. Because if I didn't write it, at least, I don't know about publication, but if I didn't write it, uh, I would have probably lost my mind or something, because I really had to write it. There was just an inner strong urge for me within me to write that book. I remember like writing for 8 hours nonstop, taking a break, and coming back to my house and taking walks to sort out a scene. I would walk kilometers after kilometer. Like I would walk out of the college gate and go to the Vice Regal Lodge at night at 8 p.m., 9 p.m., and then go all the way around those Delhi Women's Hostel, then Chatra Marg, then go to Patel Chase, come back sorting out the scene, and with a head full of sentences that I had sort of unraveled to write for the night before I go to sleep. And I was a student when I wrote my first novel. That is my first published novel. So I think you are very right when you say that there's an urgency that we must respect and honor. I don't know how that novel would have sounded like if I had waited too long, but yes. But and would it have been better? Would it have been worse? I don't know. But at this point of time, I really, really had to write the book.
Thank you so much for the honesty in that. And now I would, that brings me to another point about the autobiographical aspect of it. Every writer, to some degree, they have an autobiographical component in the writing. And now I would like to come to your book of poems. There is no good time for bad news. Here I have seen some write-up on that, and I will quote, "It opens in a country ravaged by prolonged political conflict, told in the voices of survivors. It introduces the reader to a wide array of characters." And going for skipping a bit, at once vignettes and urgent pleas, these stories are much as they are poems. Zooming through wars, protests, marches, and conflicts, they show what it means to live under the duress of prolonged violence. So here we would like to know, how much have you drawn on the, the collective trauma of the society, of the place, of the region? How much have you drawn from it to write in your writing? Could you elaborate the use of collective memory, or your selection process of the collective memory, what to put in and what to leave out, and what to sanitized, or if I may use the word, or censored for yourself? If you can give us some insights in that.
Thank you. That's a great question. There is no good time for bad news is a collection of poems. They are mostly set in rural Assam or Assam, different parts of Assam, which which are actually anecdotes and testimonies and interviews I took in 2009, 2010, while I was researching for my first novel. And then a lot of these testimonies or interviews or sharing of memories were also done in the domestic space to me, such as by my grandmother or my extended family, where they talked about the 1950s earthquake, where they talked about insurgents coming to the village and demanding food and so on. So whenever I opened up the conversation, lots and lots of memories kept flooding in. But what I was doing was trying to understand how people lived through those horrific years in the 90s and 80s, especially in the rural space, because so little of what happened in the rural space actually made it to the mainstream press. Forget about mainstream press in India, mainstream press, even in Assam, it didn't make it. Very, very little stories, few stories have made it. So I thought that I should go and talk to people. And luckily, I have a very large family. And I have a really, very insanely large family, because my grandmother had 2 sisters and a brother. Each of them had at least 12 to 15 children. We are all very closely connected. My grandmother herself, as in my father himself, has about 7 brothers and sisters. Each of them have many children, So we are a very large family. My grandfather had a brother who lived next door. He married 3 women, and in a total, I think they have about 25 children, and their children are there. So we all have grown up together in a very small part of Middle Assam, Mayong, the Moria region, and constantly we would go to each other's house. So my research, my field trips were various families, who would tell me these stories of what it meant to live with the duress of the violence. But a lot of these stories did not make it to the House of the Thousand Stories, which is my first novel. But among all of these stories that I took down, either in my head or noted down, or just remembered, a lot of the stories actually kept haunting me back, and they started coming out of my pen or head, whatever you say, in the form of verse narratives. They are actually stories at heart, but they are written in verse. They have rhythm, and what I found extremely interesting was that I didn't know what these verse narratives are at first. But what I found extremely interesting was that when the voice came into my head, it was extremely compelling, powerful, and profoundly moving to me. And at the same time, these were people who made it through the insurgency or made it through a violent period. So mostly these are survivors telling their stories to me. And as I was writing them, I really couldn't figure out what I was writing, what is the literary form I was writing, because I would write it in the voice of the character who was telling me the story. And a lot of these are also, I took a lot of liberties because I'm a fiction writer for dramatic effect and for what Chimamanda Adichie says, the emotional truth. I took a lot of liberties and crafted the stories accordingly so that they are emotionally resonant and they are emotionally truthful to those times. But I think eventually what happened, they are actually testimonials, some similar to the testimonial form in Latin America. And by which I mean that they are not testimonials, but it has the literary elements of the testimonial form. And it was interesting to me because the testimonial was seen as the ultimate truth because they are recorded interviews or recorded narrations by an interlocutor. But what was interesting to me is that if I borrowed the elements of the testimonial form and used them to write poetry, which are actually stories at heart, I could escape these binaries of, legally provable truth, empirical truth, false truth. What really was interesting to me was that these voices are so compelling and they were telling me about different aspects of history that challenges the state's version of events, that challenges also a lot of patriarchal forces, because a lot of the narrators are women. They are not only challenging the state's version of events, they are also challenging any kind of dominant patriarchal narratives and also the patriarchal military force, because they're talking about the oppression that they had faced in the hands of military. But at the same time, I didn't want to create binaries. And because I also met a lot of people who worked for the state, who were soldiers, who were cops, they themselves are suffering from PTSD after committing violence or after seeing or witnessing violence. So some of the poems are also from the point of view of soldiers, people who fought the wars, or people who took part in counterinsurgency operations as well. So all the agents I wanted to get into, I wanted their voices to come into in the poetry collection, but at the same time, make sure that this poetry collection is not attempting to be representative in any way, because that will set me up for failure entirely. But this is a slice of some of the voices. There are many voices in the poem. This is a slice of some of the voices, some of the experiences of living under the long shadow of violence. Some of the poems go back to 1962, 1950, 1947. And that's because I also wanted to say that the violence in the 80s and 90s, it did not erupt without any context, because often the foolish people in Northeast are supposed to be fighting wars which are contextless. We are seen as crazy people, so we have no reason to fight, the armed insurgency. So I wanted to address that by giving it a sense of history that problems have been brewing since 1947, and that has erupted at multiple points in time in this state. And if those problems were nipped in the bud, probably this loss of life would not have happened. So that's what I wanted to talk about through my poetry collection. I'm so glad I did. I use also, the poems are also sometimes narrated by turtles, sometimes narrated by ants, women, soldiers, police officers, children, also a lot of the community's voice, how the community sounds like as the chorus. So I think I had really sort of artistically adventurous time composing this poem and putting these poems together in a collection.
And yeah, thank you for touching on that transgenerational trauma thing, growing up in the 80s and 90s, and the stories staying in our head, and the stories that needed to come out, and all of that also. And before I go to the next one, which will be my last, could you please read to us one of your poems?
Sure.
If you can. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I hope I will have some time to talk to the audience.
Yes, after this, we have colleagues, students, and also writers, and they have been pestering after me to have Q&A time after the talk. So
Sure.
I have to I'll allow that after we hear at least one of your poems, and yeah.
Okay. So, there's a very famous poem in Assamese called Mamatar Sithi, and it is written after the poet Hem Borua. He read as a reply poem to poet Hem Borua, Ezra Pound's poem, The River Merchant's Wife, a letter. So I have written this poem called The Militant's Mother, a letter, in the same continuing the traditions. The Militant's Mother, a letter, after Ezra Pound and Hem Borua. Moramor Baba, here I have just lit the candle to write to you after a very long time. Moramor Baba, we had so many hopes heaped on you. You'll do well, ace the exams, go on to Cotton College to study, become an Indian administrative officer and return home with cars with red lights and sirens that would wake the village from the stupor. Your father startles at night. He hasn't forgotten how the officer asked him to frog jump in front of his students for raising you. Hasn't forgotten how he wasn't allowed to wear his dhoti. After it slipped down, he frog jumped 40 times in his underwear from one end of the field to the other until he reached the silk cotton tree. And when the women moved their faces away and his students looked down at their own feet, the officer shot a dog and screamed, Look at him, look at him. But Baba, if you come once, you'd forget that pain. He would move his hands over your soft hair and say, Ahili, what will you eat? What will you eat, Baba? Baba, we love you. Don't doubt it. We know that you have read more books, have thought about the world more than us, but I want to see you once more. I want to know if you are eating well, if you have lost weight. People, please come once again so I can look at your face and say, Ahili. I will serve your favorite payo with lots of cinnamon. I will cook your favorite mas tenga with fewer green chilies. Don't avoid visiting us. Do come. Even if someone informs the officer, we want to hear. Your aunt hung herself from the large jackfruit tree after the officer touched her, Baba. Your brother left for the city after they hammered sharp pins in his fingertips because he couldn't tell them where you live. What is your next plan? Remember the silk cotton tree at the end of the village? Last month, a strong bolt of lightning burnt it down. Now it is covered by a yellow parasitic plant. The village elders say it is not a good sign. I'm worried it means it will take longer for you to come. Remember the dog that was shot dead? I have adopted her 2 puppies. Now 7 years old, they guard your house. They don't know how their mother was killed. Only I know. Only your father knows. Only the village knows. But the river that carries the reflection of the sky, it knows everything, including how your father, who stares at the skies most of the day, feels. Postscript. Baba, please come. Send news with the milkman or the fish seller, like you usually do. When the fish seller brings a bunch of Boriola fish and suggests cooking with it mustard, I know what he means. I promise you, when you come down from the Tamil Dobha River, I will walk up to its bank to receive you as far as Kuramora, where the horse died. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. That's such a powerful poem, and thank you for sharing with us here. And yeah, your the other book, House of Thousand Stories, also, and this one also, his father's disease. It's there are so many amazing stories here, and just looking at the. It's so beautiful, the cover, the other one also, and one would have thought that these stories might be light-hearted or looking from the cover, it's so beautiful. But when one goes through all of the story, there is this sense of danger and sense of hopelessness, the sense of something dreadful that's about to happen. Before the bullet. When I read this, I read Before the Bullet, that story, the first, because of the title, and Digonto and the other old man, Pradhan. Here, how they met their fate. It's so heartbreaking. And so this is the kind of trauma that is there in all of us. Writers as well as people living there. I wish we have more time to discuss, but I know my colleagues are bursting to ask you questions. So for those of you who have not yet read his books, do Google all the books and then read it. I would like to first give the opportunity to Shibani to ask if she has anything. Shibani?
Hi, Aruni. That was extremely honest. So I think I would sort of want whatever you said. It just you were completely honest and sincere in your answer. So that was really refreshing. Couple of quick questions. One is, shall I just ask the questions in one go, because the questions themselves are not very long. Is there a correct way, or what do you think is the way we should tell stories of insurgency? Because that's the title of that wonderful collection of short stories that you brought out. Because I think from what I have heard from your discussions and other engagements, you believe in telling stories of survivors, not from the victim mode, but from a survivor mode. So a little bit on that. I also wanted to know that when a subject matter starts fermenting in your mind, because you write both in Assamese and English, how does what finally dictates your choice of language for that subject? How do you decide I'm going to write this in Assamese or I'm going to write this in English? What determines that? So those two questions, and I had a small third question also, because I just started reading your poetry collection. It's available on Kindle. The book is not, but it's available on Kindle. I see a lot of referencing to times before us, 1962, the Chinese incursion, or even the first poem where you refer to, I think the references to Jawaharlal Nehru's topi and things like that. So do you see that kind of historical sort of problematic, suspicious kind of relationship that Assam, Northeast always has had with mainland politics? Do you kind of try and trace that through your poetry collection? So that's it.
Yeah, I'll start with the third one because it's the freshest in my mind. Yes, absolutely. I think you have answered the question in the question. As you can, if you look closely, the poem, the Prime Minister's visit, and clearly referring to Nehru because of his long nose and all of that, and this is exactly how the people in my village remembers in my grandmother's generation. They used to say which means that I just saw the nose. He was because it was in the distance, they couldn't see him. And I think it also, in some ways, it suggests the absence of Nehru as a leader, Nehru as a prime minister. Back in 1962, when without a fight, he gave away Assam, saying that goodbye Assam. And in some accounts, like Parag Das's accounts, it says that he was on a vacation. I think this should be further investigated. But what I'm trying to say is that I'm not saying any of this is true. I'm saying these are the stories that exist in the community. And this is how the community remembers with hurt and bitterness and ambivalence about a leader. So yes, absolutely. I wanted to give a context to what is happening in the 80s and 90s. Most of the poems are 80s and 90s and early 2000s. But I also wanted to say that all the problems of the present, last 3 decades or 4 decades, has a longer context, and that needs to be remembered. And the fact that somebody doesn't remember, you will see there is no 1947 poem. The reason that is not there because people don't remember 1947. People remember 1950, the earthquake. So before 1950, after 1950 is more important for the local illiterate women, the domestic and the interior space. That's how it is remembered. So that's why I think I wanted to give a context to what is happening here. But again, that context is in glimpse and in bits and pieces because people don't have such a very clear politically rigorous reason and dialogue. These are people who are local people who are living in the villages, and they understand politics, but at the same time they are not intellectuals, and these voices would never make it to a formal intellectual book. And that's why I wanted to honor this book, however broken, however empirically untrue a lot of these memories are, but these memories exist in the society, and hence they're true and valuable for me. Coming back to your earlier question about what was the other question? Can you quickly repeat it? Sorry.
One was about the choice of language.
Yes. What determines the language? Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So that question about the language is that it's always the character's voice that decides. For me. But my Assamese book, I actually wrote it first in English, the short story. So it makes it into the short story collection as the love lives of people who look like Kalpen. So I really like the short story. So I thought that I would develop it into a whole novel following Rajiv and Adayomi's love story in an Assamese novel. So eventually with editing and all, the characters change, the story, the plot changed a lot, but the core of it was basically I wrote a short story in English that I wanted to rewrite that I started developing. The short story was developed into a novel, but not in English, but in Assamese. That's because I was hearing the moment I was writing it, I was hearing Rajiv's voice more compellingly in Assamese. But when I was writing the short story, I was hearing Rajiv's voice more compellingly in English. It really determines that. I think if I had heard the voice of I think if I had heard the House of the Thousand Stories from the point of view of Ohola Jathai or Mridul, who can't speak English, the book would have been written in English. So that's one of the reasons I could never translate the book. Actually, I had to hire a translator because I couldn't translate my own word because I cannot get the way Pablo speaks in English to reflect in Assamese, but my translator could. Because the voice is so clear in my head, I could write another novel from Pablo's perspective or voice, probably. So I can hear his voice very compellingly, very convincingly. I'm sorry, what is the other third question?
How do you tell a story of an insurgency?
Right, yeah, absolutely. Sorry, you have to forgive me because it's early morning here. So, yeah. I think I did not know how to write a story about an insurgency, even though I had written an entire novel on it and written multiple short stories in Atmaram set against the insurgency after 2013 as well and before 2013. I think that's the reason why I went ahead learning how to write by collecting these stories. I read numerous stories set against the insurgency. I read numerous novellas and novels and nonfiction memoirs set against the insurgency while I was researching for how to tell the story of an insurgency. Eventually, I collected almost 25 stories, but we had budget for 15 stories. So I had to sort of be as eclectic in the experiences as possible. And also, we cannot forget that so much of the struggle is driven by identity politics. So I also had to think about identity. So in many ways, I honored the content of each of the stories. So I wanted to, but those 25 other 10 stories still exist with me, and I will hopefully one day find a different publisher to, at least in Assamese, to bring out all the stories. But coming to your question, this entire exercise was actually this question: how to tell the story of an insurgency and how to represent violence and so on. And I think all of these stories have told me two very important things. A story about an insurgency not necessarily always should be about an insurgency. It may not always feature directly. It can be at the background. It can be a folktale, but set folktale retold, but set in the 1990s as the violence is going on, because we don't want our minds to be colonized by the violence. We don't want our minds to be completely occupied by the occupying forces or colonizing forces or violent forces. So if you want to escape that, telling a story, retelling a folktale is also a story about the insurgency, as long as it is written during that time by somebody who has lived through that time. Other thing was that that the insurgency is very different from the point of view of women who stayed behind and women who actually participated. I think it was one of those insurgencies where there are lots of women cadres, but only a few of the cadres had written memoirs or poetry or experiences of their own. So, but a lot of people who stayed behind, whose brothers were insurgents, whose children were insurgents, the novels, novellas, and memoirs were written from the perspective of these women. So reading them also taught me that, for example, Monikuntala Bhattacharya's novella, there is not a single act of violence, but the violence is the patriarchal violence, that this woman is not given any importance, and because the son has left, she has to take out all the responsibilities of the house, and is still not appreciated. So I think what I really eventually understood is that the shadow of violence is long and it is intergenerational. And I also, while putting together the collection of stories as far as disease, I realized that the shadow of violence is something that can affect a gay couple in North Dakota, South Dakota, American Midwest, because Raj, Daphne's character, is marrying his husband here because he really can't live in Assam anymore. He doesn't want to go back because he wants to live a peaceful life and a boring life with dogs and a husband. And he's escaping not necessarily because he's gay, but he escaped because he's a migrant as a result of the long shadow of the insurgency. When I was living in Minnesota, I realized that people who have been living here for decades, the moment I would talk about the insurgency in the 80s or the 90s, they would get emotional, talk about people they have lost. Their children are grown up, but they have not gotten over the trauma and the sadness that made them leave home. Who would want to leave home if you could stay, next to your home, right? And I think, especially with indigenous communities, we want to live next to our home. We want to live next to the river that is meaningful to us. We want to live next to the tree that is meaningful to us. We don't want to come and live in Dam Kidali at Calcutta, right? It's because we have been forced. It's a self-selective selection we have made because we have not been given options. So I realized that there is not one way of telling a story. Any kind of story that shows this long shadow or the immediate shadow is a story about the insurgency. And all of these stories matter. That's what I learned by actually all of these exercises. And for each book, it has been a lesson for me. How do I tell the story of the most defining event in my generation and beyond, and before and after? Because any conversation about Northeast, the Assam insurgency is not just localized to Assam. When there's an instability in Assam, it affects the entire Northeast. If there's Band in Assam, everything is affected. Definitely Meghalaya and Arunachal, right? So it is something that is very big. It affects the daily lives of people. So somebody in Meghalaya who is not able to go out to Borjhar because they have an emergency is also getting affected by the Assam's insurgency or the Assam's instability. So it is a question that can have numerous multiple answers, I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Aruni. Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions. And thank you so much for engaging with my work, to both of you.
Thank you. There is one question here from Satyendu. What is your idea for elucidating a particular subject which was limited in an original language? Like, what do you do if you want to extend your ideas more?
I think what you're asking is how do you develop an idea? I think I research a lot. I really do research a lot. I read a lot. And most importantly, as a fiction writer, I talk to people a lot. Because for me, actually, written history is less important, but how people remember a certain event is more important for me as a fiction writer. So my questions are like, what are you eating when the bomb blasts? What were you eating when your husband was arrested? What were you wearing? What did you watch the previous day? Those are my questions. What did you cook in the morning? What happened to the food? After this terrible thing have happened, what happened to the food? Did you throw away the food? You know, how much,
Yes,
how many
understand.
children were there? Those are the questions that I ask. That for me is research. Then of course I have to know basic history, so I go and read them, and I find books there. But sometimes when you have lived through a lot of the history, you don't really have to keep on looking for. When I wrote my first novel, The House of a Thousand Stories, set against the secret killings, everybody asked, how did you research? And I'm like, I was living through that period. Every day going to school was a stressful thing to do. Every day I would read about the secret killing. Somebody is dead, entire family gunned down. Mithinka Demare's whole family was gunned down. His sister-in-law was 20 weeks pregnant. There was one pyre that wasn't lit. It was inside the dead bodies, a woman's body. The baby was about to be born. 20 weeks is very advanced pregnancy. Those things, those horrific things that as a child I grew reading up at the breakfast table, and how could I not write about those things? And how could I forget those things? And do I need to do research on what it meant to live through that period? Probably not, but at the same time, I think I did some research, I did read some books, I did talk to people. So I think the idea depends on what you want to do with to the questionnaire. You have to decide how the research will be. If it is a historical project, you go and read historical books. If it is a literary project, you read literary text and history whenever required.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And this one is from Aruni Kashyap. How would you evaluate the role of literature in inculcating sociocultural sensibility in today's university spaces? And secondly, what are the unique challenges authors of the Global South face in their literary pursuits today?
The first question is, what are the unique challenges? What are the how literature is read in the Indian public university system?
Yes, evaluate the role of literature in inculcating sociocultural sensibility in the university spaces.
Sure. Okay, Kallul. Thank you so much for your question, Kallul. I think that literature makes us human. That's the first and foremost thing, because when we read something, we inhabit another body who is going through that experience, and it makes us empathetic, sensitive, and it makes us human. We don't meet someone who probably doesn't even exist, a fictitious character, but that person's experience becomes our own. That's the most important thing. Now, with culturally, any text that is rich in cultural elements, historical elements, is going to educate us in some way. But I think the chief role of literature is that we are able to inhabit another person. It makes us empathetic, it makes us sensitive, and most importantly, when we read a lot at a young age, we become emotionally mature. And being emotionally mature is a really crucial thing, because it doesn't mean many smart, intelligent people are not emotionally mature, and that's because they don't read fiction when they're young. And no offense to people who don't read, but sooner you start reading, it's better for you. But I'm saying that if you don't read from a young age, especially fiction, it's very hard to be emotionally mature. And I think those are the benefits of reading literature. Everything else for me is an extra point. Second question says that what are the unique challenges authors of the Global South face in the literary pursuits today? I think it's a very broad question, but I'll try to talk about my own thing. For example, that I'm from Northeast, that I write in a different literary tradition is not something that is important for somebody who is trying to publish in a wider market. What they are looking for is how my experience and my content speaks to the moments in their market. And eventually it's a market. So I think the other thing that Global South writers might face is probably an oversimplified understanding, oversimplified reception. We come from very complex realities, but I think these are things These are also problems with translation in some ways. Even if you're writing, even if you're an Anglophone writer, from Africa or from India or from Bangladesh, you may face the problem of being oversimplified. I think that's the big problem. The other problem is that, when you're a global South writer, I don't know, like I cannot think of earning a living just by writing and just by pursuing creative writing in India, for example. I think it is also not possible in Africa, for example. Maybe in Egypt and maybe in South Africa, but I'm talking in general in the continent. So a lot of writers have to look for more advanced economies to get published, translation rights, and so on. Now, that's a very contested space, as in it is not easy to make into that space, literary space, because what you need is a literary agent who will love your work and champion your work, and a publisher who will be interested. And also, you'll have to write. Your work will also have to speak, and there's only a few little spots for the writer from the global South, because they have their own writers. If those spots are filled up, then they say, "Oh, we have already published these many African writers this year, so we don't need another African writer. We need one more South Asian writer." So you can see what are the problems there. So I think the solution is to support our own writing economies in whatever way possible, so that we don't have to depend on foreign market to keep the arts alive.
Thank you. This one is from. This is the last question. This is from Gunjandas. One of our students, he's a male student. He's one of the member of the Northeast Welfare Committee. He works together as the student body. He's asking, kindly let us know about your thoughts on the situation of vulnerable languages in northeastern region of India. Do you think encouraging people to have literary works on such indigenous languages can help protect them? Kindly explain some ways.
There are many vulnerable languages in Assam, in Meghalaya, in northeastern languages, and that's because they are small in number. And one way we can keep those languages alive, and as we must, is to actually make them support them. Support people who are writing in those languages. Force our governments to fund literacy programs or fund fellowship programs, so that people write and use those languages and keep them alive. That's the only way I think to go about, because if these languages become extinct, we will never get them back. So it's important for us to keep those languages for sure alive. But this is something that is, I think, globally that people are facing, which is the erasure of indigenous languages due to the prominence of English or due to the prominence of another language in the same country. And we must resist that, because we have to keep all languages alive. I think that, yes, you're right. I think that encouraging people to publish literary works on indigenous languages can definitely protect them. And I can see that in Assam it is happening already. There are different kinds of literary conventions that are based on indigenous identities, tribal identities. There is a missing Sahitya Sabha. There's definitely a Boro Sahitya Sabha. There's Karbi Sahitya Sabha, and so on. Basically, and these committees and non-government organizations are keeping these languages alive, and it's very important. They publish books and make sure that the next generation reads those books, or at least possess them and read them and circulate them and think about them.
Thank you so much. This has been such an encouragement for all of us, inspiring, and very, it has enabled us to look at life, to look at our society through literature, and we have gained so much from the discussion. And from the questions that were raised, we know that there must have been many more our colleagues and students wanted to ask, but for the lack of time, we have to call it a day for today. And the conversation can continue. I know Aruni is really open to dialoguing, for conversation and opening up channels of getting to know each other's culture and all of that. So you can get in touch with him also, and he'll be happy to do that. I would like to also thank all my colleagues who from the other colleges as well, and my senior colleagues from my English department and from our college ARSD for coming right at the beginning before time and then staying till now. We are so grateful. We are so thankful to you. You have made this really successful one, and we look forward to having you again for the coming series as well. And I would like to now take the opportunity to ask Aruni to come again. Please say yes whenever we needed you. When we send invitation, please come again. And so to round off the talk, I would call our convener, Naurem Premjit Singh, to give the vote of thanks.
It is an honor for me to give the vote of thanks. And first of all, I, on behalf of Northeast Welfare Committee, would like to express my gratitude to our esteemed principal, Professor Gyantos Kumar Jha, for his untiring support and encouragement to our society. It is in fact because of his support and encouragement, we or our society could organize different kinds of programs like Rainbow Fest. It is an annual fest. Orientation comes to a program, movie screening, and many more events since 2015, and of course now in webinar. And I would like to extend my gratitude to our today's speaker, Sir Dr. Aruni Kashyap, for taking out time for us. Sir, you have shared wonderful and very interesting insights. And I'm from science background, but it was very nice to, very interesting to hear your poem. And we are truly inspired and motivated by your talk. And I'm sure that the students also have benefited tremendously. And we look forward to having you with us again in the future. I also would like to thank my colleagues and members of this committee, Asinglu ma'am, Shivani ma'am, Nimalini ma'am, Pinky Roy, and Ajit Kumar for their kind cooperations of this webinar. And I also would like to thank the student committee member, Ms. Gedam Iti, Gunjan Das, Samjen, Yompi Kaisi, Oram, for their hard work in making this program, this webinar, a great success. And lastly, but not the least, I would like to thank our colleagues and from college and from various colleges and everyone attending this webinar. Thank you all for coming, and we look forward to having you all again for the next program in August. And thank you very, very much all once again. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Bye.